Hi Sondors owners. In this video I'm going to walk you through a hydraulic brake upgrade for your Sondors bikes. Why would you want to do that? Well, the Sondors bike is a great bike. Really high value for the amount of money that they cost. Good electric bikes. Okay. If there was anything about the Sondors bike that I would change, however, it's the brakes. They come with Tektro mechanical brakes on 160 millimeter discs. And these are pretty underpowered for a bike of this weight and this performance level. The mechanical brakes don't have nearly the stopping power or the attenuation of even just decent quality hydraulic brakes. So it's a pretty easy upgrade to make. The problem is you got to have your e-brake cutoff switches in the mix somewhere. All right. Now these mechanical brakes that come on the Sondors bikes, they have built-in e-brakes, and if you want to go to hydraulic brakes, which you do, trust me, they're so much nicer. There's only a couple of companies out there that make hydraulic brakes with e-brake switches built in. Well, all that is irrelevant now because the new TripWire e-brake sensors on the market are pretty inexpensive, easy to get, and they can allow you to put e-brakes on any brakes, whether they're hydraulic, mechanical, rim brakes, doesn't matter. You can put an e-brake switch easily and quickly and reliably on any brake system out there. So what this does for you is it allows you to put good quality hydraulic brakes, which frankly are the standard of the industry nowadays for everything outside of electric bikes. And it's all because of the the e-brake switches that are built into only a couple of models of hydraulic brakes. Those ones that have them built in range from expensive to very expensive, and I've not been very impressed with the quality of those hydraulic brakes. So what this allows you to do is get any good quality or medium quality hydraulic brakes anywhere on the market, whether it's one of the aftermarket places like Jensen USA or Bike Bling or any of those kinds of places where you can get good brakes for discount prices because they're they sell a lot of stuff that's, say, a couple of years older, or you can get them off of someplace like Pink Bike or eBay. You can get some good quality hydraulic brakes and put those on there. The difference in you'll be astonished in the difference in stopping power and the amount of brake feel. The way you can just feather in exactly the stopping power that you want. One of the upgrades we're going to make is that we're going from 160 millimeter discs to 203 millimeter discs. And while the difference might not seem that great, in millimeters, the stopping power is much more. All right. And so to do that, we're going to need a few bits, parts, and pieces that you'll need to acquire. You can get these anywhere you like. I'm going to show you what I did. I tried to go, as inexpensively as I could, but with really good quality components. So on Pink Bike, I found these. They were right in my area. I just drove over and picked them up. These are good Formula RX brakes, hydraulic brakes. These are in near new condition. One of them needed a brake bleed, which I know how to do, so I went ahead and did it. However, you can take these brakes to, if one of your brakes feels spongy or something like that, and you think it needs a brake bleed, you can often buy those for less expensive, not quite so much money, and take them into your bike shop and have a brake bleed done, which is anywhere from $15 to $20, and they'll be like brand new. All right. So these I got off, again, Pink Bike, a front and a rear, and I think I paid $80 for both of them. In addition, you're going to need the discs. I got these off of either Pink Bike or eBay. I don't remember. These are basically Avid clean sweeps, which are, good discs. But they're 203 millimeters. I don't know if you can tell the difference in the size. I'll show them next to the small 160 millimeter discs on the Sondors bike in a few minutes. But it comes with the mounting screws. These particular ones did. Again, you can buy these at any of the aftermarket places. 203 millimeter discs. There's a pair of them, front and back. Now, some people like to put 203 millimeter disc on the back for really strong stopping power back there, and then maybe, excuse me, 180 millimeter disc on the front to give you a little less stopping power, so that when you pull the two together, there isn't that that front brake really grabbing. I personally don't find that to be an issue, and there's a little bit of a learning curve when you first start riding the bike, but eventually you're going to get to the point where you're going to be able to use all the stopping power you want, and you can attenuate it with the feel, and it's just fantastic. Finally, you're going to need brackets. Okay, these brackets are what hold your brake calipers. This part right here, the part that squeezes on the disc and has your brake pads in it. This is what holds them away from the mounting bracket on your bike in the front and the rear, the correct distance for the size of disc that you buy. All right. So if you've got 203 millimeter discs, you want 203 millimeter brackets. You'll find, when you take the brakes off of the Sondors bike, it's going to have 160 millimeter brackets on there because it's got the smaller discs. All right. So really, this project is nothing more than taking the old brakes off, attaching the new discs to your hubs, putting the wheels back on, and then mounting your new brake levers and calipers with the mounting brackets, and then just adjusting them, and I'll show you all how to do all of those kinds of things. Beyond that, the only other thing is installing the TripWire e-brake switches, which again is easy, and there's a really comprehensive online instruction video for how to do that on any bike. So you can find that at ebikes.ca, who sells the TripWires. Look in their Learn tab, and you'll find the videos that describe the TripWire e-brakes, and then other videos that also tell you how to install them based on what kind of brakes you buy. They have two models, one for brakes like these that have these vertical hydraulic cylinders, and then they have another model that you can buy if you have horizontal cylinders. So you can buy just about any brake out there, and you can make the TripWire work for you. And then it's going to be a matter of connecting those TripWires to the e-brake plugs off of your controller. All right, let's get down to it. I recommend first thing that you do would be to go ahead and take everything off of your bars or rotate it underneath the bars so that you can flip your bike over so it's sitting on its seat and on the handlebars, so it's easier to work on while you're taking your wheels off and changing out the discs. So here we go. I'm going to start by removing this mirror that we've attached. Okay, so you're going to want to find those wires where they come into your battery box. So go ahead and just grab them and wiggle them around so you can see which one of these wires is the one. Okay, so I'm just pulling from the top and pulling from the bottom, making sure that those two are in fact connected. And then I'm going to go ahead and just pull this Hygo plug apart. These are waterproof, so they go together pretty good, but you can see they're red when you undo them, and they got a red tip, so that kind of helps in getting everything, making sure that you're dealing with the brake lines and not something else related to your controller. Inside the Hygo connector, there's just 2 pins. All right? And that's all you're concerned about is those 2 pins. If it has more than that, more than 2 pins, you've disconnected something that is not the brakes. And it'll have a different color. It won't be red. So. Alright, with everything removed off the handlebars and your brake sets removed, it's time to go ahead and switch out these discs. So you're just going to go ahead and take your front tire off using a 15mm wrench. Okay, and don't forget these little hooks that are in here. So you're going to want to turn these out almost as far as you can on both sides without the nuts falling off, so that you can move these little hooks out of those holes. Like that. Same thing on the other side. There you have it. All right, so now you're gonna go ahead and replace this disc with your 203 millimeter disc. A couple things of note. These will generally have an arrow on them that denotes that's the face that goes outward on these discs. They're also attached and removed with a T25 Torx. Yeah, T25. And they're generally installed with thread lock, so you might find that once you get them broken loose, there's still going to be some resistance as you take them out. Okay, so just screw those out. Sometimes these can be pretty tight. Just break them, break them gently, and then go back and screw them out one by one. Okay, so before you actually take it off of there, go ahead and grab your disc that you're going to replace it with. And that way you can make sure you line up the direction. On this one I can see my little arrows. Get them pointing in the same direction as these arrows. Go ahead and take this one off. Put that one on. And that way you know everything is going the way you want. Alright, so you're just going to put this back on with some thread lock. I got the blue stuff. This is the, inexpensive stuff from the nearby Chinese tool retailer. And you don't need very much of it. Just put like one drop on there. Use the tip to spread it around, and that's good. All right, let's put the wheel back on. Make sure that your caliper mounts on the fork are on the same side as your disc. That way you're not putting anything on backwards. And don't forget your little hook washers need to go on the outside of the fork slot there. And you'll probably have to lift up just slightly to get the bottom tab of those hook washers to go in the hole, and then you can run the bolt back in to hold it in place. Same thing on this side. All right, we're going to do the same thing with the rear wheel. It's a little bit more complicated just because there's, your chain here and some wires. And on the opposite side, you've got these little, and this side too, you've got these little chain tensioners, that kind of thing. But again, it's pretty straightforward. So first thing you're going to want to do is disconnect this cable right here. So underneath your your bottom chainstay, on the chain side, you've got this plug, which is what basically plugs your motor into your controller. All right, and again, this is one of the Hygo plugs, but it's a little bit bigger one. Has quite a few pins in that connector. So you'll just take and slide these wires out of these little wire routing guides. Okay, and the way they work is, you know, one side lifts up and gives you some room on the other side. Like that, and you want to get them out of there, kind of crisscross. Lift them out. In fact, you might not even need to lift that one out. If you get this one out, you can just go ahead and pull that plug out. You can see there's lots of plugs in there. Something to note is there's this little white arrow on the side of the plug right here. Another arrow on this plug. So when you do go to plug that back together, you'll line those arrows up so that you make sure that all the pins line up with the receptacle holes in this side. So yeah, you can just leave that inside this this wire guide right there. Okay. So to loosen the nuts for the axle nuts, there's this little rubber cover. Just pull that off and slide it down like so. And then we'll go ahead and loosen these chain tensioners on both sides and the axle nuts on both sides. And then take the chain off of the front chain ring, like so. Let it hang on the crank arm, like that. And then you can go ahead and make sure that your chain tighteners are out of the way. Your whole wheel will slip right off of there. I like to keep the chain like so, because it's easier to put it back on after the fact. Okay, pretty much same process for the rear here as you did for the front. Oddly, with the Sondors, the rear disc bolts are Allen heads rather than Torx. I've never actually seen another type of bike that had theirs that way, but this one is. So again, take note of the direction of rotation so that you can match it up with the new discs that you're putting on. And then one last note of caution, try not to set your bike down on the wire. Okay, this side down here has this wire. It comes out of the center of the axle, okay, and it's got this little opening so that it can bend over sideways. And it's got this sort of metallic spring stuff on here. But you really want to be cautious about that. You don't want to be pinching it and putting a lot of pressure on it. That's why I like to do it like this, sort of suspended between two surfaces, so there's literally zero pressure on it. So turns out that the Allen wrench for these is at 5/32. It's really close to 4mm, but not dead on. And those are pretty tight, so just be cautious. Don't cam out your bolt heads. Alright, time to put this tire back on. This wheel, I suppose. Okay, so one thing to take note of is that this washer, the way these washers go on this bike, get it up here so you can see. Everything except this last washer right here, which doesn't spin, okay? And it has a little protrusion on it that runs in this slot, okay? And that keeps your wheel from spinning and messing up your wires coming out of the axle if these should ever come loose. All right, so everything except for this one last washer goes on the outside of the dropouts, and same thing over here on this side. Everything but that goes on the outside. Go ahead and run make sure that your axle nuts are run all the way out so you've got plenty of room, like so. Okay, move all that stuff out except for that one inner washer. Alright, so again, just everything in reverse. Take your chain off. Thread it around there. Put it right on the cog. Okay. Slide your wheel in place. You might have to rotate it to get those inner washers to line up with that slot, and then it should just slide in. All right. Now, double check that you've got your torque washer on the inside and everything else on the outside, right? And then to hold the wheel in place, go ahead and put the chain back on your front chain ring, and that way you can let go of it and it's not going to slide out of those dropout slots. So again, you're just going to put it in these little slots. You have to go kind of sideways to get it in the guides, and then straighten it back out, and then pushing backwards. You're going to again line up these two arrows, one here and one here, so that the plugs going in there line up just right, and push that in there nice and solid. Okay, you want that to be nice and solid in there so that it's completely waterproof. All right. If you kind of get your alignment on your wiring nice and good there, and you're good to go. All right, time to go ahead and install your brake sets. So we're going to start off with the bracket that spaces them out from the fork mounting holes here, and it spaces your caliper out far enough to work with the 203 millimeter disc. All right. So if you look on these, oftentimes they'll have an arrow that says up. And on this one, I think it was actually mismarked. It says R180, but I've checked it and it is definitely for 203 millimeter discs. So that's probably why I got it super cheap. All right, so the bolts that came with the bracket, they already have thread locker on them. And the bracket goes in between the mounts and the disc. The nice thing about most of these hydraulic brakes is that this whole bottom saddle comes off, has 2 bolts in it. So when you take those off, you can take them off and put them on your bars without having to completely disassemble, you know, your grips and anything else you might have on the bars. Okay, there we go. So it doesn't really matter where this goes for now. All right, so now we're going to put the caliper on. And so you're going to slide that over the disc in between the brakes. All right, you're going to want to look at your routing. Go like that. There we go. Look at the routing of your cable. Okay, it's going to come up along your forks here, and we're going to talk about this cable guide in just a minute. But looks like you've got, you know, plenty of play there, so that when these forks compress, there's, you know, some movement for those. So you can see that the bolt holes in the calipers are slotted. They're oblong or oval or whatever you want to call it. And that's an important adjustment that you'll make when you're adjusting these brakes. So when you screw these on here, again, slide it over the disc. Put your screws in here. Tighten those down all the way down, but only, you know, finger tight. All right, so I'm going to finish up showing you how to adjust these calipers. Ran into a little bit of trouble, and I'm going to explain that in just a minute. Easy to fix. So remember, you're going to put the calipers on here, and you're going to tighten these bolts up, top and bottom, to a tension that allows there to be side-to-side play. All right, on both the top and the bottom. All right, and then you're going to squeeze the brake lever. Okay, that clamps your brake pads down onto the disc, and that basically puts this caliper in the perfect alignment with the bracket in those slots, those that allow it to move side to side. Okay, so with the brake lever squeezed, you're going to use your Allen wrench to tighten these up nice and snug, like so. Okay, with it still squeezed, you're going to use the other end of your Allen wrench to tighten them to full torque. Okay, nice and firm. Bing, like that. All right, and then at that point, you'll flip your bike over, go ahead and spin that wheel, make sure that everything's working correctly, operate your brake, make sure it's stopping right, and nothing's hitting, binding, touching, scraping, any of that kind of stuff. That's actually what happened to me, and I'm going to explain that right now. Here's a close-up shot of this caliper in place. You can probably see it best down here. I ended up having to put a washer right in there between the caliper and the bracket. Alright? And that's because once I got the caliper mounted onto the bracket and I went to spin the wheel, the top edge up here of the disc was actually hitting the outside of the slot, the little slot. I don't know if that's even viewable here. It was hitting the slot right up here, so it was actually hitting the body of the caliper. It was too deep, basically, okay? By just a tiny little bit, all right? So I went ahead and put a couple of, this is a M6 bolt, so I got 6mm washers, stainless washers, flat washers, and I went ahead and put those in there, and that gapped that out just far enough so that my my disc wasn't rubbing at all. Now, that's something that can happen if you're buying, these brackets are, made to fit most calipers, unless you're going to go out and buy the expensive, made for formula brake calipers, brackets, then, you might have a few little adjustment issues. But they make a variety of thicknesses of washers to go in here. And I actually just ran down to the hardware store, and there were some thick ones, some thin ones, and some medium ones. And I just messed around until I found exactly the right distance. And then once I went through that adjustment procedure that I described just earlier, everything fit just fine. And the brakes work great. Okay? So that's the front end. We're going to talk about briefly next, securing the cable, because that's a little bit of an issue as well. All right, so you can see that the hydraulic brake tubing should go inside of this cable guide right here that's on the edge of the shocks. All right, and that's what it's designed for. And there's a couple other cable guides you probably remember when I took the old brakes off along the way. The problem with these is that, unlike most bikes, these are full circumferential cable guides. Okay, they require you to thread the cable housing down through those holes. Well, unfortunately, with hydraulic brakes, the only way to do that is to disconnect the brakes up on the top from the brake cylinder, okay, and then thread it through there and then connect it back up to the brake cylinder. Unfortunately, if you do that, you would then have to re-bleed the brakes. If your brakes are working fine, there's no necessity to do that. So I do have a method that you can use for connecting these, the hydraulic tubing to these cable guides with a zip tie that's pretty invisible. Okay, so what you'll do is you'll just stick the zip tie down through the hole. You'll come around the tubing with the tail, stick that back up through the hole, like so. Okay, and then pull it down as far as you can, and take the tail and come back around to the front side of the zip tie, and then go ahead and thread that in there. Okay, now you're going to want to play with this a little bit to try and get this nice and snug. So you'll have to pull some of this up in here like that. Okay, but eventually, if you keep messing with it and pushing it until you get it where you want it, you end up with a zip tie that's connected like that. And then use a little pair of cutters to cut the tail off, and that's a pretty clean install. Okay, and that's holding that tubing in place really well. Now, if we pan back a little bit, oops, you'll see that the movement of the shock absorber is above where this is tied into the housing guide, the cable guide. Okay, so as the shock goes up and down, this section of tubing up here is the one that will go ahead and move with that. So you don't have to worry about that getting scrunched or tensioned or pulled too hard or whatever. Okay. All right, now for the rear brake. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and attach the brake handle to the bars just like before. Checking to see which way they say up on the saddle. Alright, so we've got this other caliper to install. You can see this this is going to go on exactly the same way. It's going to slip on, oh, here's my little gap keeper. It's going to slip on to the disc like so. And it's going to work, let's see, look for up on the thing. So this is going to go here and bolt up. The caliper is going to go there and bolt onto the retainer, or onto the bracket. Alright, so same as before, first step, install your bracket. Chaser, but you can see these are slotted. Okay, so once this is in there, even if there is a little bit of a, a gap like on those other ones that we experienced where the there we go, that started, where it was sitting a little deep and we had to put those washers in there. In this one, it's got the ability, apparently, to move it back and forth in these slots if necessary, which might make things a little bit easier or more difficult. I don't know. I'll let you know as soon as we get done here. Okay, so now that both of those are started, I can run those in. Hopefully these don't stick out as far as those other ones did. If they do, in this case, if they come really close to the discs, and that one's got plenty of space, so that shouldn't be a problem. What I was going to say is if they come close to the discs, rather than having to grind the tips off of the bolts like I did, it's easy enough to just put a washer underneath the heads of these. And that should eliminate any problems. And that one's nice and far away as well. So, okay, so playing around with this thing, I found that where the bracket mounts to the frame right here, like we talked about, those mounting locations are slotted so that the bracket can sort of move one way or the other. I found with this particular caliper that having it right about in the middle of that slotted travel in the frame is what kind of works out the best. So I played with that back and forth and found it now. So now we're going to go ahead and mount the caliper. You can see that it sits down on there nicely. There's plenty of room in the front and the back, so it's not hitting the body of the caliper. It's just running smoothly between the discs. So we're going to go ahead and just mount the caliper. Okay, so that goes down on there, and then the caliper bolts just screw right into there. And then again, same deal here. You want to screw these bolts down to the point where there's just a little bit of play, both front and back, or top and bottom, if you prefer, side to side. And then we'll go ahead and tighten these down for final adjustment using that same methodology where we squeeze the brake handle. Okay. That clamps the pads down onto the disc. Give it a little wiggle so that we're sure that everything's nice and free and that it's finding its own alignment there by doing that. And then snug down these bolts, and that should have our alignment just perfect. Alright, there we go, everything seems firm. Alright, I'm going to flip this bike over so that we can test it. Alright, everything seems to be running smoothly. When you spin the wheel, nothing's rubbing or hitting in the caliper, so the alignment seems to be correct. You give it a good spin and then test the brakes. You can see that they're functioning properly. So that's good. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and use the zip ties in that same technique that we described before on these circumferential cable guides that are welded to the frame. Because they're they're full circle, you can't run the tubing in there unless you disconnect it from your hydraulic cylinders on your brake levers, and then feed it up through there, and then reconnect it, and then you'd have to do a full brake bleed on these brakes. To avoid that for now, I'm going to just go ahead and use this sort of saddle, what I call a saddle lock zip tie technique, going through these guides to hold them in place. And when it's done, you'll see it looks pretty nice. And then, if somewhere down the line I do need to do a brake bleed on these, then I'll go ahead and run those cable guides in their natural location. So. All right, so what we're going to do now is go ahead and get the handlebars, this whole cockpit area here, back to the way they were when we started. And because the TripWires are designed to be, installed without having to remove or take anything off of your bike. You can do it just completely externally like that. So we're going to do that first, get everything back the way that it was, and then we'll go through installing the TripWires. All right, so this is where we're going to install the TripWire e-brake switches. And I'm only going to cover the part that's specific to the Sondors. The information that you can find at ebikes.ca about how to select the right model of TripWire based on the brake set that you buy, and then how to install it. They describe a couple of different mounting methods that you can choose from that range anywhere from temporary to permanent to invisible, how to really hide the thing, and all of those sorts of things is covered extensively on the ebikes.ca website. So I recommend that you go there and just watch those videos. I think you'll find a lot of great information that'll really give you an understanding of that. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to cover the parts that are relevant to retrofitting the Sondors with these e-brake switches. So what I've done at this point is I've gone ahead and selected, where the switch is going to sit on the hydraulic tubing, and I've temporarily zip tied that in place. All right, in this case I've chosen to take the wire and have it remain routed along the length of the right side or rear hydraulic tubing. That way I can just zip tie that in place along its length and have it be nice and tidy, pretty invisible. And then when I get down here to the union of the top tube and the down tube, I'm just going to take this wire and thread it through this front little opening in the frame, like so. And then it will dive into the battery box, you know, in that same location that all the other wires go in there. There we go. Along like that. Okay, as you can see, I've got everything opened up here in the battery box. You should still have your battery out of the bike. And then again, up here, I've got the wire following the hydraulic tube down here, and then right here it diverges, goes through this hole in the frame, dives into the wire access hole in the battery box, and then comes out down here. All right, here we are down inside the battery box. We're going to take these and just connect them to the two red Hygo connectors that we disconnected previously. It doesn't matter which one you plug it into, however. Now the Hygo plugs have a little slot in there that has to line up to index them properly. So just make sure that you're in that slot and go ahead and connect them and push them together. Same thing for this one. Line up the slot. Make sure that's fitting properly. And there you go. And try and keep all that stuff over there out of the way so the battery fits in properly. Okay. And then we are going to test these. So let's go ahead and put the battery back in. There we go. And we'll close that up. All right, we're ready to go ahead and test these. Now, these TripWires, which are you'll see when you check them on the eBay eBike CA website, that there's two styles. There's one that activates when you pull the cable out of the housing, and there's one that activates when you push the cable back into the housing. Okay. Now we're using the push style ones because we have these brakes that have these vertical or hydraulic cylinders that are perpendicular to the plane of the bars. All right. And so these need to be able to get the travel out of the lever. They need to come up underneath, and all that's explained on the eBike CA website for the installation videos. To test these, however, both of them need to be pulled out. And so what I've done is I've taken and I've pulled this one out and just clamped it in a pair of hemostats right here to keep it permanently, to keep it held outward. Okay. And then I've got the bike turned on. And I'm just going to tip it on its side so that the wheel is up off of the ground, tilting against the kickstand. And then I'm going to grab the tip of this TripWire and pull it out, and I'm going to try the throttle. And there you can see it moves. There I got it going at a steady rate. And then I'm going to go ahead and let the TripWire back in, and there it stops. And I have no throttle. Okay? Go ahead and stop that with our fancy new brakes. Now, just to be double certain, I'm going to go ahead and remove these hemostats on that side, connect them on this side, and perform that same test on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to pull this TripWire out, give it a little throttle, and then I'm going to let the TripWire back in, and it stops rotating, no power. My throttle is dead. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. Okay? Alright, so that takes care of our test. We know that our wires are properly connected to the Hygo plugs, properly connected to the controller. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this bike off. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and install these TripWires in the standard method that's depicted in the videos at ebikes.ca. And you should do the same. I'm not going to videotape that whole process. You can learn for yourself by going and watching those videos. And once these are all hooked up, I'll give you a little video tour of what it looks like when it's finished. Alright, here's the bike finished up. You can see the tips of the TripWire sticking out right there. And that's what activates them. You can see the switch body right there. You can see standing in front of the bike, it's almost invisible. And then the wires follow that route down. I used several cable ties to keep everything nicely together. Use some of the little Sondors triple connectors to tidy everything up. Here's the one on the other side. Again, you can barely see it. There's the little cable housing going up, and the TripWire sticking out right there. You can see how that moves in and out of the cable housing when the brake levers are activated. And everything's been adjusted to work perfectly. As soon as you move the brakes, the motor cuts off on either side. And this project is done. I went out and rode this bike, and the difference in how well it stops is really astonishing. For a bike that has, you know, these tires and this size contact patch, and is, you know, this heavy with a heavy rider on it, I weigh close to 200. You know, locking these brakes up, you know, basically skidding the tires was essentially impossible with the previous brakes on here. On this bike, with these new brakes, you can do that now, if you need to. Well, I don't know why you would want to, but if you need to. But I'd say the biggest difference in these brakes, and the really noticeable, astonishing thing, is the attenuation. And that's basically the feel of the brakes, and the way that you can feel the road and the trail, and the, you know, your stopping power through them, and how feather precise they are. They just have a lot more leverage against the calipers with those larger discs. And I think it's just a fantastic addition to the Sondors bike. It was a great bike to begin with, but with proper brakes, big difference.